Hello, Cryptolings and YouTubers. Welcome to another episode of CryptoCurrent. I'm your host, CryptoRick, and today we have a very special guest with us today. We have Colin Cantrell, who's the CEO of Nexus Quantum Blockchain. So I just want to welcome Colin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And just a little minor correction. I'm not the CEO, but I am the founder because
Okay.
we've put a lot of work to try to I guess re-envision how decentralized architectures work. I've been a bit of a critic of decentralized blockchains having CEOs. So yeah, I know it's something that typically kind of looks like I guess I'm the face or public figure of it, but I try to stray away from that. We try to keep it as community driven as possible. I think that's kind of some of the original ethos and roots of crypto that I think will really see it change things. Otherwise, if we're just creating CEOs, what are we doing creating another Wall Street? So
That's right. So, yeah, for those new to Nexus, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how Nexus came into existence.
so my background kind of goes back. I started programming at age 11. I started basically working on the database administration systems for my dad's business, actually, which was Strategic Space Development. As sure some of you know, he was kind of on the founding team of SpaceX. Kind of Elon called him to start SpaceX. So I kind of had an early start in life, I guess you could say, learning to work with kind of high-profile clients, developing databases. I remember my first task was to fix the database system that everybody said could not be done, and I guess that's where I kind of got conditioned in the idea of, hey, if people say you can't do it, then I'm going to figure out how to do it. So I did that down in like 50,000 lines of code. There was this one little line that I was like, oh, okay, cool, fixed it. And that's kind of how I got started. And so I've just been very passionate about coding and very passionate about what you can do with it. That led me to crypto and blockchain, also understanding, looking at the world and saying, okay, why is humanity the way it is? What needs to happen for it to change? And really, a lot of it came down to the implementation of the financial systems. And so I, started out, found crypto, Bitcoin, and Litecoin, and I just knew it was just this kind of, I don't know if you know what that feels like, but I just was like, this is the future. This is how we do it, right? We can rebalance wealth distribution, and we can, I guess, break ourselves away from these debt-based monetary systems. But at the time, there was, I think, like 40 or 50 crypto projects being launched per day. And a lot of them were just promising hopes and dreams, and they were playing off the hype of Bitcoin and saying, hey, it's going to be the new Bitcoin. And, I was really kind of disheartened by that because I saw what it was going to do to the industry. It was going to erode that potential of like, hey, we're building new, monetary system that, we're trying to do professionally. But when you look at, all these scam coins and people creating them, and, there was like Dream Coin, and I mean, all these other, it just was ridiculous. So we started a project called CoinShield, and that's actually the original roots of Nexus. And we were basically designing a system to help people that got scammed by some of these, crypto coins, and creating kind of a review system. So I naturally kind of started doing that. I'd have people come message me and say, hey, what do you think of this proof of stake algorithm? Or this guy's making these claims, like one of the original ones, like Vanilla Coin, if you remember that. John Connor, I think, was a guy, and kind of getting into some stinks with him because I found security flaws in his zero. It was what, zero coin, not zero coin. Zero, can't remember what it was called. It was an automatic transaction processing system that happened instantly. It was basically copied off of Dash's Instant X, right? And he was claiming it was bulletproof. And then, I had people from Facebook groups like, hey, can you check out this code? And I looked at it and I found, oh, he's not checking CoinStake inputs. So, I can just override any of these transactions if I just, make a CoinStake transaction with one of those inputs that were spent. And, I posted about it publicly, and then caused some, some issues with him. He got really mad and whatever. And that kind of, I guess, was just the early days of CoinShield. People would, hey, can you review this code? Can you tell me, or can you implement an attack against it? And, because there's a lot of, it's such a, I guess you could say, mystical technology. It's such a new way to think that, people seldom understand it. I think at the time there was Jeff Garza quoted, there was like 17 people that knew actually how to build layer one blockchain. It's just, and so I really set off on that. And then kind of later down the road, I started, seeing more and more scam coins, and then Ethereum, and then ICO craze. And it was just like, okay, you know what, maybe that's not going to work. Being able to stop this pandemonium, maybe we should, look a little differently. And, started thinking about, open internet access and seeing kind of net neutrality issues coming around the time. And with my background in aerospace, started considering kind of developing a satellite constellation to do kind of decentralized internet. And then from that, Nexus was born, right? The name kind of went through a rebrand as the community grew. People were like, hey, you should probably upgrade your branding. And so we went by Nexus for a while. And then in parallel at the same time, my father was starting a rocket company called vector space systems, and they were essentially wanting to build a satellite constellation that was kind of an Amazon Web Services in low Earth orbit, and we became one of their use cases for it. So started a technical partnership there, and then then it came to the issue of, okay, well, that's still a centralized managed cloud, right? If we want to really build something totally decentralized, we need to start rethinking that. So we hired a guy from Iridium to help kind of start envisioning that. And again, he said, it can't be done. And I was like, well, what did I hire you for? Let's figure it out. And so, paid him for like a year or so. And he didn't come up with too many new innovations, but we were going to launch like a simple 1U CubeSat using UHF VHF, which is ham radio, right? Because frequency licensing was a big issue. And over the course of 3-4 years, I found out about ISM frequencies, and eventually published a paper on how to actually create a decentralized satellite constellation system. And that was published December 21st, I believe, 2020, which really culminated in like 5 or 6 years of just studying how we could do it. And the frequency licensing was a big one, right? Because I'm kind of a decentralized maximalist, if you haven't noticed with Nexus, right? We have 3 mining channels to check and balance one another. We've experimented with new social architectures, right? Because I noticed a common trend of, like the beginning of this interview of, typical corporate structures applied over these decentralized blockchains. And I saw kind of the fate become of Bitcoin, where Blockstream, the company, kind of pushed out the Bitcoin Foundation, and Bitcoin kind of lost touch with, I guess, some of its roots of being this decentralized community-driven protocol that should be open and accessible to anyone. And they use the block size debate for that, saying, well, if blocks get too big, then people can't afford hard drives, and mom and pop can't run it, and then it becomes centralized. But ultimately, what happened is transaction fees became $200 instead of buying one hard drive, and continually limiting the opcodes, and then the SegWit battles. And that's why I started designing the social architecture too, because I saw, okay, well, that's the critical point of vulnerability for Bitcoin, is the development, right? The funding of the development and the centralization in the development. And this kind of God complex of these developers, and then a lot of times encourage that, right? Oh, hey, it takes nuclear physicists to work on blockchain, and you'll never understand it, even though a lot of people understood some of the basic economics enough to say, hey, we can increase block size. So I guess a large part of Nexus has just been sitting back and watching the industry mature and evolve, and anticipate problems, and also seeing problems that other projects have succumbed to, such as like architectural issues in Ethereum, or the block size and democratic issues with Bitcoin, and that causing it to split, and social architectures and things like that. So Nexus, you could really say, is kind of a culmination of let other people make some of those mistakes and then anticipate them. That's why I originally was talking about quantum computers in 2014, when everybody said I was crazy, and then it would never happen, and that was the big talk of the town. And seeing some of the architectural issues with Ethereum, and saying, oh, that's not going to end well. They're going to start having some serious scaling issues, and then a few months later, start having some serious scaling issues. So I really consider the potential of blockchain and the potential of crypto and Nexus to be something that really is, I think, one of our best shots at solving a lot of these pandemoniums happening in the world. Really, if you look at study the problems, everything goes back to debt-based monetary systems. And if we can at least do something that improves that even slightly, we're better off than we were before. So that's one reason why I'm so passionate about it, and really keeping those ethos of Satoshi alive. I started Nexus with kind of the early Bitcoin 1.0 source code, reading through the comments, because as developers, we leave comments, hey, to do, I want to do this, and I didn't have time to build this. But like a peer-to-peer market was included in the original version 1.0 of Bitcoin. I don't think a lot of people know that there was an actual market protocol message. That's what he envisioned. He envisioned creating an open free market system, an open currency system, and having it decentralized with no formal leaders, and no CEOs, and no companies that govern it, and everything like that. And it's still a prototype, though. I mean, the 0 in front of the version number indicates that it's still a beta, right? It's not actually gotten to a full release technically yet. And that's kind of what we're doing, is if Satoshi really, if Satoshi were to finish Bitcoin, what would that look like? And I like to think that would look like Nexus, but that's just my perspective, and that's what we aim towards, I guess, is the best way I could say it.
Sure. So tell us about Nexus as a blockchain. How do you maintain its quantum resistance without using a master private key? I noted that the seed phrases are changeable. So how does it, what's your reasoning behind having no master private key or having changeable seed phrases? How do you maintain a, a feeless
Yeah,
quantum secured system like that?
that's a really good question. So the seed phrases and the username, password, PIN, login system is not necessarily to make it quantum resistant. It does, based on the signature chain architecture, that helps. So basically what a sig chain does is you generate a new key every transaction, and then that key remains hashed. And so as soon as you reveal that key, then a new key is created to replace it. And then there's also another mechanism on the network where geometric, I guess, progression of the transaction, which means that it expands out. One node gets the transaction and sends it to all its other nodes. It sends it to all those base to exponential expansion. That basically, there's a locking mechanism in the memory pool so that if somebody else tries to, let's say, oh, hey, I got your public key because you just created a transaction, and then I have a quantum computer and I can try to break it, even if you're not using post-quantum cryptography, let's say ECDSA, and you break it within 1 second, your probability is still very, very low that you'd actually get that transaction pushed through. So there's that mechanism, which is, the locking mechanism in the memory pool, and then the generating the new key. So that actually allows you to use ECDSA in a relatively safe manner, right? It automatically enforces that rule. Or with Bitcoin, if you don't reuse or use a different key every time, which, like, for instance, exchanges, you have the same exchange address. So all those exchange addresses are going to be vulnerable because as soon as you've withdrawn, those public keys are vulnerable and then they can be cracked. But we also use another algorithm called Falcon. It stands for Fast Fourier Lattice-Based Compact Signatures over NTRU. I know it's a mouthful of words, but essentially it's lattice-based cryptography. So think of lattices as just kind of big groups of collections of points that follow a similar mathematical algorithm. So you create these 10, 20,000 dimensional lattices. These specific ones are called an NTRU lattice, and they don't have any known post-quantum vulnerabilities, such as, ECDSA suffers from breaking the discrete logarithmic problem. And that's what most Bitcoin transactions use, or RSA is the integer factorization problem. Those two algorithms are broken with a quantum computer with about 1,792 logical qubits. The physical qubits based on quantum noise, is debatable. Some people claim 100,000 or whatever, but all in all, it's getting close, right? So, but to go back into the signature chain, right? That architecture has many, many different uses. For one, I explained how you're rekeying so that it's basically one-time use keys. It treats every key as if it's insecure as soon as it's published. And then that also you have the memory pool locking, which prevents somebody from creating a conflicted transaction. So, a typical double spend would be, I buy merchandise, I send a transaction to you, I get away with the merchandise, and then I send a conflicting transaction that then spends those inputs I just sent to you back to myself. And that's your typical type of double spend. So it protects against that. Another thing is signature chain, right? So a signature chain is kind of like a personal blockchain. So you get this kind of pseudo-anonymous digital identity where you can see, the assets you have associated. You have a history that develops trust, but you also only have to keep the first and last signature. So your signature is the biggest, I guess, data requirement in a blockchain, right? Your typical ECDSA signature, if it's 256-bit, I think it's 96 bytes, if I remember that correctly, something like that. So that's where segregated witness, they wanted to segregate this transaction signature from the TXID and have a witness that was a separate, to verify that that signature was valid. Which is good. We do segregated witness architecture. Your TXID does not include the actual signature because you can do transaction mutation attacks where malleability, sorry, is the correct terminology, where you can re-sign the same transaction with a different signature, but it's still equally valid with the same inputs, and you get different TXIDs, which messes with the mempool and stuff. And that's a flaw in Bitcoin. But the biggest thing architecturally is you don't have to save all these signatures. So when you're dealing with post-quantum signatures like Falcon, it's the most compact one. And it is about, I think, 850 bytes for the public key and like 900 to 1,000 bytes for the signature. So you're talking almost 2 kilobytes, 1.5 kilobytes to 2 kilobytes per signature, right? Now, if you add this into a UTXO architecture, every input has to be signed. And that's how dust spam attacks happen. You just send like, I'm spending 0.000001 Bitcoin, and it still requires one signature. And then the next input and the next input, so on and so forth. So you could have these really, really, really large, inefficient transactions. Signature chains, it only requires one transaction for a maximum of 100 contracts, right? So you get this really nice aggregation. But then you only have to keep that first and last because since it's its own personal blockchain, as long as you have a sign of the first and the signing of the last, then all of those previous TXIDs are chained in. So that means that it's basically sealed with the first signature and sealed with the last one. So when you get to 1,000 transactions, now you've saved about a megabyte of disk space per user. When you get to, 1 million, now you've saved about 1 or 2 gigabytes per user, right? So as you use more transactions, then it scales up the data usage very, very efficiently. So that's another really good part of the signature chains. Now, we could have done a root, private key that changes saved on your disk in a wallet, that just like Bitcoin with that architecture. It doesn't necessitate username, password, PIN. But we did that, the username, password, and PIN, because one of the biggest use case problems I've seen with Bitcoin is people lose their keys, right? It's another big issue with encryption applications, right? If I have, a decentralized digital identity that I vote on and whatever else, and I lose my key because I dropped my phone in the water, or, I've had my daughter's phone got put in the washer by my other daughter, and, these things happen, and that phone is gone and you lose all your private keys, right? I think the frozen Bitcoins, I think more Bitcoins have been lost than actually stolen, right? And if you remember when Bitcoin first blew up, there was horror stories of somebody like whose girlfriend didn't like the fan noise on their computer, so they stopped mining Bitcoin. They had like 10,000 Bitcoins on it, and then they eventually threw that hard drive away, and Bitcoin blows up, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's worth $10 to $100 million now. What the crap?" And they actually go to the dumps and try to find it, and it's bad, right? So that's a huge usability issue that I've seen. I've done this also by sampling people, right? I didn't design Nexus just saying I have all these problems solved. I talked to people. I talked to a lot of Fortune 100 companies. Through 2018, 2019, I was very fortunate to be able to talk to a lot of these larger companies. What do you see blockchain as? What do you see it being in your system? How do you think it can improve, the efficiency of your systems? And then, what are some drawbacks? And same with just random people in the park, sample them. Hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? They're like, yeah, okay. Hey, well, I had Bitcoin once and I got like $50,000 worth of Bitcoin. And then I uninstalled the Bitcoin app because I didn't think I still had to have it because I'm just used to online bank. And then my coins were gone. And I was like, oh, like, yeah. And it happens a lot. And then I think that just eventually will erode trust, or, it will also encourage custodial services, right? Which one of the ethos of crypto is not your keys, not your crypto. And that's one thing that Binance has been really putting on is, hey, it's better for you to keep your coins here because we're going to keep them safe, and we're going to insure it with, our what is it, the fund, whatever they called it, the SAFU fund, and trying to play it on the HODL and whatever. And it just recreates the same banking system, right? So if and people are also not used to having to manage things like that. They're used to being, remembering their password and, their username and PIN, but sometimes they forget that. So that's why we created the recovery system, so that you can have, 10, 20 words. You can give 10 to your friend and 10 to your mom or whatever else, or you can write it on a piece of paper and keep it in a safe. And then you can always recover your account because people forget their passwords, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we did that for ease of use and also for integrating dApps, okay? Because let's say you have decentralized social media and your social media identity is based around signatures from your private key, which is basically how it has to work. Where's that key going to be stored? Okay, is it stored on my device? Okay, now I've lost access to my social media account. I even had that happen on Keybase. It was this encrypted Slack, and I just was like, I don't like this thing. It sucks and whatever. I uninstalled the app, and it's like, oh, I lost my keys. Now I can't get back into my Keybase account. Right. And I had to go through this whole account reset system where like reset my keys and whatever and deleted all my data. And then I could kind of pseudo access it again. But management is a huge, huge, huge issue. And we can't give people too big of a transition, right? Like you can't just go from like totally having this custodial, the bank insures my money up to 250,000. If I forget my password, I go yell at someone. If something bad happens, I call customer support and blame it on them, right? To like, I'm now completely sovereign and in control of my entire financial future, and I have to manage all my private keys and make sure I don't get hacked. And like, it's just too much of a jump for people. So people naturally are going to move to custodial service, which is just kind of what's happening now. And in order for crypto to be fully realized, as far as that vision, we need to be custodians. We need to take responsibility for ourselves, because that's what's going to change the world. As long as we're blaming someone else for something that we've done, nothing's going to change. Mm-hmm. So encouraging that self-sovereignty and giving people tools to do such a thing, right? And that's where the SigChain architecture, like I said, it's multifaceted. There's lots of things that it was developed for, and that specifically to the username, password, PIN, and seed phrase. That's why we designed that way. But just because it's that way doesn't mean that you can't still manage it old school style, right? Like I'm working on a feature right now, actually, for some old school crypto people that just want to have like a big private key stored on their disk. And you can still do that. It's just, username and then your password is just a private key, really, really big private key. It's actually way more secure that way too, because it takes about 1 second to generate your key. Where with ECDSA, it takes about, I think, 5 milliseconds. So you've got around 200 keys that you can search through per second on ECDSA or any, typical like Bitcoin, where with Nexus, you can only do one per second. So it slows you down significantly. So it creates, I guess, a kind of a catch-all in as many ways so that, the people that don't want to go to that level don't have to, but the people that do can, get really crazy about their really long passwords and private keys and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, that's basically the signature change. Like I said, it's multifaceted. Usually everything we develop, we try to develop it with multiple solutions in one feature, I guess you could say. So it's not just like focusing on one individual thing.
Thanks for explaining that. So your white paper talks about not just blockchain, but the internet tokenizing satellites, microsatellites, ground stations. So
Yes.
can you explain that vision, and is Nexus more than just for finance? Do you have a greater vision, and how do you see that working?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the fundamental ethos that I could say describes Nexus in a whole is decentralize everything, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. We've seen it through history, time and time and time again. A single human mind just can't contain that much power. It will destroy them slowly, right? Whether it makes them go mad or, corrupts them or whatever else. So decentralize everything. So, we need to decentralize communication. We need to decentralize, power production. We need to decentralize our currency, and we need to decentralize our information access, right? Like, you sound like you're from the UK. Is that correct?
Australia.
I'm picking Australia. Okay. Well, UK. Sorry, I'm American. I'm not good with accents. Um, in UK, I'm just saying that like if you even say anything against, you're getting arrested now. Free speech violations, right? And information is getting totally destroyed off the internet. I mean, I can't even find anything on Google anymore. That you used to be able to just find the most random forum post from like 10 years ago, if you remember those days. Just the most obscure information anywhere on the internet, and now it's next to nothing. I mean, I even get like totally different results that are suggested results after like 10 results on Google now, right? So the information, freedom of information, I think is really important. I use the analogy of the Dark Ages, right? There's a couple factors that caused the Dark Ages. The first one was the Roman Empire collapsed. And when they collapsed, they were responsible for a lot of the road networks, and they had the very first mile markers and all of that. When the roads collapsed and the world, information could travel freely between people. And when information can't travel freely between people, it gets siloed and it gets stuck in certain areas. And you could see that creating a type of darkness, right? People lost a lot of these skills that they had during the Roman ages. And the second one was a mini ice age, is what it was called. It was a grand solar minimum, where the sun kind of goes through these solar cycles. And so the sun spot activity was at the lowest. And so it was harder to grow food. So there was a little bit more famine. But the two together, information really, I think, is the key to that, though, is information needs to be able to travel freely. Think of the Library of Alexandria. It created so much enlightenment. Or the Renaissance, right? People were exploring all these things. And what were they doing? They were writing papers and they're getting peer reviews, right? Like Sir Isaac Newton. And then I don't know if you know Newton and Leibniz. Those are different notation systems, and there was this debate about it. But it was international, like all across Europe. You could publish a paper in Britain, and somebody in Germany could get that information, and it could be shared, and it could be understood, and it really sparked this revolution of information and exploration, right? Which, to me, is what we need to become a functioning society. So the satellite constellation system is, for one, to create a physically isolated source of information where the information can actually be stored up there, and we cache it on the ground, right? So that you have this physical isolation property where it can be protected and replicated in that sense. And then the second is availability and access to information, right? Facebook and Google, I think, have tried to fix the internet connectivity issue. There's only about 2 billion people connected to the internet, so about 6 billion people don't have access. And it's an economic issue because those people are generally in impoverished countries and they can't pay $100 a month internet bill. And so it's changing that game theory and the economics of it, where people can buy the hardware and access the network, right? They can access that data. And then the people that are hosting sites and, providing services, they're the ones that enter into a contract with the satellite operator. And then it it exists as kind of a decentralized trusted system. If you saw at the very end, we kind of harness some game theory too, so that you develop a reputation as a hosting provider, so that if you're a bad host, you eventually sell yourself out. But it also had the anti-monopolization barrier, if you saw that, which basically creates a mathematical limit to where if you um, monopolize too much of the actual hardware, then your selection bias goes down, so that more people will go towards the new smaller guys, and it decentralizes it more. So it mathematically can protect against some of these human conditions, you could say, of the greed or trying to take things over or have more for themselves, but ultimately to allow information to be free and accessible. But there's other aspects too, right? Like, I mean, I think there was a country in Africa, they got connected to Starlink, and then they got addicted to porn and social media. It was a news article. It was just recent, right? So the internet has also become kind of a cesspool. The original, hacktivism or freedom fighters on the internet from the 90s, Fravio was one of them. He was a seeker, is what he called himself, where they believed that information be freely disseminated, software should be free, everything should be open source for freedom, right? And I still very much believe in that. And I believe if we had an open network where you could have more of this reputable information openly indexed rather than it being this black box at Google, right? I think people naturally select things that are going to be more, enlightened, especially as there's new discoveries, and people are inventing new technologies. There's huge suppression of technologies that threaten the military-industrial complex. There's just I could go on and on and on about information. Plus, if you've seen communist takeovers, for lack of better words, information gets siloed, it gets censored, it gets destroyed, books get burned. So books need to be immutable. And also, we need to also be able to source information to know where it came from. Hey, I'm making this claim based on this specific source, or I'm building on someone's research. Just like a blockchain, somebody can publish a paper, and then you can reference that paper and use that. And then eventually you could have this chain of events 100, 200 years from now, where you could say, oh, hey, this crazy new technology, let's say a flying car, and it references these guys' technology from, 2000 or whatever, this paper on the basis of controlling gravity or whatever else, it might be. And that can show you where everything came from. And when we understand the source of things, I think we'll be able to understand the context and what they are now a lot better. And we could understand the original meaning of Sanskrit words or the original sounds of vowels in Hebrew, right? A lot of that information has been lost. And, I mean, we're relying on these ancient scrolls from thousands of years ago. Imagine 2000 years from now, information is, let's say, on Nexus, and it's all recorded, and all of that is referenced back to individual things. I mean, imagine how much more enlightened society will be if it doesn't have to relearn everything after, it goes through a wave of darkness and then everything gets destroyed. Books get burnt, or some guy takes over a country and then that's against their agendas. They want to get rid of their opposition. It totally neutralizes that. And so, I don't expect it to change things overnight, but over time, if you have a system like that, right, which a lot of people are starting to become aware of, like some people that I work with that are in some, high up circles of freedom fighters, people are starting to talk about like Nexus and needing a Nexus, which is really cool because, I think we came a little bit before our time, or before the world was ready, which is good though, because it's taken a long time to build it. But people are in the world starting to recognize the need for this and seeing the problems as they're materializing in the way that they're materializing now. So yeah, it's in a long-winded way, it's multi-pronged again, like, information, communication, accessibility, and, the removing the ability for people to manipulate information through visibility, I think, is another really, really big one. Because if you search Google and you type certain keywords, you only see what Google gives you, and then you believe that is what things are. So when you can control the visibility and access to that too, you can control what people think. And I fundamentally, believe in, I think we have the potential to enter into another renaissance, right? Another technologically driven renaissance that's going to be driven by space exploration instead of exploring the oceans, and new high technologies such as, particle weapons and plasma weapons, and, electrical propulsion systems instead of chemical propulsion systems. And I really do believe that is in our future. And in order to get there, I think information just needs to be open and accessible to everybody.
Sure. Now, the $1 million question on everyone's lips is Nexus the same system that is referred to in the BIS project, Project Nexus?
BIS project, I'm not familiar with that.
Project Nexus is like the Bank of International Settlement project to deploy finance and CBDCs, and interconnected payment systems. And they called the project Nexus. I was just wondering if there was any link, or was it? Yeah.
No, it's a good question because it brings up, my wife talks about this to me a lot, where she'll just be like, Colin, be careful, because like they could use that against people, right? Like what I'm building, like it very well could try to like flip it around and like, oh, trust system becomes social credit score system or whatever. And in a lot of ways, what they're pushing for, like, digital identity and digital economies and everybody's interconnected and whatever, like it's similar. But this also can be on our advantage too, because we can flip that narrative on them. They're planting that seed in everybody of what the world could look like. But this is where I say, if it's decentralized, that's the winning ticket, right? And pseudo-anonymous being like, I only reveal my trusted record to the people that I want to reveal it to. You can't just go dox me. It's a sig chain. It's just a series of events, right? It doesn't have any context to me unless I go and say, hey, I signed a message to show this is me here. I'm trustworthy. Look, this is my job application. Here's my work history. I'm going to give you that. And then profiles too is another thing. Here's my work profile. Here's my social profile. Here's my, friends profile. Here's this specific friend group profile. And here's my main master profile and whatever else. To kind of create more pseudo-anonymity, because I think that's really important. I think, that's a given right to privacy as well. So if it's decentralized, mathematically related, and if I build it right, which these are a lot of ifs or whens, right? If you want to see it, then they can't. It won't matter. It will actually flip their narrative right back on them, right? Just, that's what they do, is they hijack these narratives and try to flip it back on us. So why don't we do the same to them, right? We can create better communication infrastructure. We can create a better social cohesion system. We can create a better record system so that, my job applications, I can't lie on. Here's my resume. It's immutable. It's timestamped. You can't lie about your age if you get a sig chain when you're born, right? So you get all these other additional benefits to society. And in some senses, you could say it looks like that, but in other senses, it's kind of the antithesis of it. But, as two things, being on opposing sides, they tend to be alike, right? In absolute light, you're blind. In absolute dark, you're blind, right? It's the contrast between the two that allow us to see. And so, there is that risk, and that is definitely one of my daily headaches. I'm like, okay, like how could I take this over? How could they take this over? How could they use it and flip us against us? If the Chinese wanted to take this technology, how could they use it against us? Well, the big thing about social credit scores and CBDCs, they have a switch that they can turn off. So if you say something against the Chinese government, for instance, boom, social credit score, they shut it off, you go red or you go yellow, you get locked out of your apartment, your bank funds get frozen, they take all the money out if you get a fine or whatever. They have control over your finances, right? They have this back door into the whole thing because they control the system. Nexus, they don't. I don't. Like, I can't. I've had people like be like, oh my gosh, like I forgot my password, give me my coins. I'm like, I can't. I physically cannot do that. I don't have that power, and I like that. I don't want to ever have that responsibility. So, like I said, if we design it and build it right, a lot of the benefits of an open, interconnected digital system can become possible, but in a way that they can't corrupt it. And they'll try. They definitely will try. The world bankers will try. And one thing that they do have on us is they control the world's money. This has been, a bit of a trouble of, how do we fix that specifically, right? Because if they have all this money, they can just buy everybody's new time. How do we make old money not buy new time? Only the new time is bought by the new money, if that makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
We need to figure out how to invalidate their money, which we're not there yet. Crypto's driven by Wall Street, all the fucking like BlackRock owns ETFs and they're pushing all their stuff and they can manipulate the markets and all that stuff. But maybe if we could have more commodity value systems or economies that are based more off of real substance. Hey, I have tomatoes and I'm trading these for Nexus, and figuring out how to value it in that way. I think that's a huge weakness of crypto, is that everybody trades when they do peer-to-peer trades for merchandise based off of a fixed value that's driven on an exchange that is very easy to manipulate if you have enough Bitcoin. Right, you can buy or you can sell, and you can move the price however you want based on the liquidity of the market. To experience that volatility, how would we create and take these peer-to-peer trades and push them into the valuing of the currencies, so that the more that people are exchanging it for goods, services, and things they're doing in economies, more that would buffer, I guess, against manipulations in the market from Bitcoin or USD. I mean, Tether, they just Tether now, just like, oh, print Tether, pump Bitcoin, no audits, right? And so in a lot of senses, crypto has become the same thing. And I guess that's one reason why I'm so passionate about what we do, because I really still believe in those ideals and
Sure.
what.
So I'll presume that answer is no. The next question is, there was an article about a possible integration with IPv6 internet overlays with Nexus, as well as possible integration with Pi Stellar network. Does Nexus have any current or future planned integrations with BSV, Bitcoin, Satoshi Vision, Terranode, IPv6 overlays, or Stellar Pi network technologies?
I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with my relationship with Dino Farinacci, but he's actually one of the guys that taught me a lot about the lower level architecture of the internet. I met him at our 2017 conference, and he was really inspired, blown away by Nexus. He was the very first fellow of Cisco. So fellow is like your highest up tech. I think has like five fellows. They're the guys. And so he basically built Cisco, and he worked on the operating systems for the early Cisco routers, and he developed something called locator identifier separation protocol, which is an overlay. Okay. And it separates the locator from the identifier. So think of it like on the internet now, if you go to a different town, every time you go to a different town, you get a new phone number. That's kind of how the internet works, right? Your locator and identifier couple. List separates them, kind of like cell phones work now, where you have your phone number, right, which is your IP address or your EID, and that is your identifier. And then the locator is just whatever network or IP address you're on. And so that specific overlay supports IPv6. And we use what's called crypto EIDs, so that you can actually have a signature required to verify your endpoint identifier. And so that's something I've been working on with Dino for a number of years. When we first started, actually, I was like, okay, well, the mapping system, is it decentralized? And he was like, no, it's centralized. I'm like, well, we want to use Lisp on Nexus. We have to make it decentralized. And so he's like, all right. And so he'd come over and we'd work a lot together, and we designed an actual decentralized mapping system. You can see the draft on the IETF if you want to search Colin Cantrell on the IETF repositories. And it has our RFC that we've been working. And actually, Dino just messaged me a little bit ago. We're moving to have it actually published as an official RFC instead of an informational RFC right now. And he says that the decentralized mapping system that we designed, it works best, out of all of the other Lisp applications. I think Cisco, a lot of other large ones. As far as like using Taro, no. The most I've done with the overlays is working with Dino and Lisp, which basically it allows you to cryptographically authenticate your identifier, so that you can still use a VPN underneath, right? So your locator never has to be revealed, but you have a common identity, which means that you protect against a lot of fraud. You don't have to worry about tracking VPNs, because you now have this specific network identity that stays with you. Now it's pseudo-anonymous, because like I said, you can still anonymize your locators, which is what a VPN essentially does, but it gives you a common phone number so everyone can access you. And so Lisp is something that, we've worked extensively with. Dino's implementation of it is written in Python, and it was locked into a lot of the system calls for Linux. So I've been working on developing additional C++ versions of it, but it also is a large inspiration for the stack that I developed, that white paper, the Nexus Protocol white paper. Go into the one stack, the execution stack, and that does decoupling locators and identifiers, and that's part of the whole routing system that I've designed with the geospatial locator IP routes or regular internet protocol routes, so that it can still act as an ad hoc network and still access the capital I internet, but it still has this new routing system on top of it. So in a long-winded question, yes, we're working with overlays, mainly Lisp. Not necessarily with other crypto projects and their overlays, but really helping Dino take that to the next level, and also having the crypto EID tied to your SIGChain identity, so that you can actually sign. And we have a key in your crypto object register that you use to sign for Lisp messages and stuff like that. And then eventually that's going to become its own full-fledged internet stack that replaces the OSI down into the operating system level with LXOS.
Sure. Now let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the esoterics. How did the symbol name and the sky blue color of Nexus come to being? So, was there any reason, to call it a Nexus, and have the, I guess, the symbol of Saturn, or maybe a planet or something, or a moon, or yeah, just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very good question. The symbolic aspects of Nexus, definitely. Symbolically, Nexus, I wanted it to mean, as you've probably noticed by now through most of this interview, everything we do is multifaceted, right? I designed something for multiple purposes. So Nexus is, a network. You could say that, the original Cisco routers were actually called Nexus routers. I think it was in the Blade Runner is the name of those AI things, right? Nexus is a really synonymous name. I didn't choose it because it's so synonymous, but because it means a connection or series of connections linking two or more things, right? So the idea of Nexus is a network of computers. It could also be a network of satellites. It can be an internet protocol. Instead of calling it the internet, it's just Nexus, right? Which ultimately it makes a lot more sense than calling it intranet. And it's also a nexus of people, right? It's a community of people. It can be a nexus of economies. It's a financial nexus. Like there's so many loaded expressions of that word, and that's why I wanted it to be called that, because it encompasses all the possible things, right? If you have even decentralized power grids where people are pushing power to one another, that's a nexus too. It's a local power nexus, right? Communication, a nexus of ideas, right? Which ultimately is a lot of the ideas of different people and their suggestions. They're like, hey, it'd be cool if you could do this. Be like, cool, I'll figure out how to do that. And then I figure it out, or I'll get an idea and be like, hey, what do you guys think of this? And they'll be like, oh, I could use that for this. This is awesome, right? So it's a nexus of ideas. It's a community, driven idea. And the logo is interesting. I think we finally got that logo. It took 3 years almost to come up with that logo. We went through so many logos, and it was really a community driven logo development. I think we originally had like the coin shield was like a little shield stack of coins, and then went to Nexus, and then it was just like Nexus with the big X, if you remember the old Nexus logo from 2015. And then some members of the community were experimenting, especially when the satellites came around, and they created that nice little circular Earth logo, which is a satellite orbiting, right, or a planet or a moon, or I guess you could say it does kind of look like a ring of Saturn, which is interesting too. It's an orbit showing like the orbiting of what Nexus is here ultimately to do. It's creating this new communication infrastructure. And so it was really cool how that all tied together. And I really liked that logo was developed by the community. It was something that they envisioned, I guess, from the content of everything that I was developing. And when I saw it first, I was like, that logo is perfect. It's a beautiful logo. It's really nice, clean branding. The blue color, I think, was just the color of the logo naturally, and blue's my favorite color, blue and gold. I like those colors too. So it just feels so refreshing, when you're just like, oh, look at this blue, I just want to drink it. It's like water, life, and all that other stuff, which it really is. Like, there's some interesting pictures if you look at the old pictures of astronauts in space, and they have this kind of blue orb around them too. So it seems like there's something with blue in life. I don't know, the sky, blue, oxygen, water, everything. So, yeah. So, giving life, I guess you could say, is what the blue would symbolize, and developing trust too. I found this later out down the line, actually, when some marketing people came in, that the psychological association subconsciously with blue is trust, which we have a trust system, right? The more trust you develop in the system, the more you get paid, and so on and so forth. So it's another aspect too. I didn't intend it to be just to represent trust, but I thought it was an interesting byproduct. Finding out later down the road, it's like, oh, that's crazy. All these webs of different events come together in this one thing. And I guess that the branding and the colors and the logo and the name and all that kind of were developed over many years. And yeah, those are the fundamental reasons why.
Sure. Now let's talk about the token and the tokenomics. So the token's called In Excess. It sounds kind of like the band In Excess, but it's got 76 million max supply, no ICO, no pre-mints. It's proof of work. In the future, is there any plans to inflate the token, increase the supply, or fork it, or possible plans for compliance with AML, KYC? But I think Nexus is undergoing a fork, but do holders get compensated with an equal amount of the new token?
Yeah. It's great questions, by the way. I love it. I mean, it's not the answer, it's the question, right? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So the tokenomics of it, right? I noticed here's one problem I found with Bitcoin is this, people tout this as like one of the features, but deflationary, right? So it's good if you want to maintain the value of something, but I've seen a scenario of a deflationary collapse, which actually it might might happen a little bit. We'll see what happens from here. But I was thinking this halving cycle, it was looking like it was going to happen. I don't know if you've seen like miner reserves are depleted. Like tons of the Bitcoin reserves of miners is depleted because the block reward, whenever it cuts in half, your your income cuts over instantly overnight. And the power to coin production margins, I guess the amount that they make versus the power that costs, are very thin margins with Bitcoin mining specifically. And so when your revenue gets cut in half, the price has to double to maintain that same level of security. And it may be the next halving. Every time the price has to double, it takes exponentially more resources. So this time, Bitcoin still hasn't doubled. I think the halving happened at 40,000, and we're 60,000. It might get up. I think it'll make it this time. I was a little, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, the halving! Like, come on, Bitcoin! Like, double in price." It's kind of this ironic psychological thing because the supply hasn't cut in half, which would be the typical market, like supply demand, right? It's just the emission that cut in half, which is such a minuscule amount of supply at this point. It doesn't really move the market, but it's just this psychological cycle that has to happen for Bitcoin to maintain its security. Then the next part of that, the deflationary collapse, is once the rewards decay enough, it drives all of that security into the fee model, which means that your fees are going to get more and more and more expensive in order to maintain that same level of security. And it's completely based around the transaction throughput, right? How many people and how much they're paying in their fees. With Nexus, it's different, right? And I'll explain it because it's kind of a unique economic model. Mining decays to a minimum of one Nexus every minute. And about September this year, which roughly equates to about 78 million. Then you have the proof of stake, which that is 0.5% to 3%, which right now is at about 0.52, 0.53%. If you just take the total amount of proof of stake that's been emitted over the almost 10 years now, and then divide that by 10, you get about 0.52%, which is a little bit above, which is good. That shows that not all the coins have actually fully staked or received all of the time that they can receive back. So that's something that's inflationary. And that's compounding inflationary too. So that means, 1,000 years from now, that coin supply generated by proof of stake will increase a lot more because you're staking your previous coins. So we by default don't restake your rewards. If you notice, your staking rewards go to your balance instead of your stake field so that you can spend it. And that's designed that way to just be like, okay, well, I'm going to spend my staking revenue. And that's, it doesn't have to get relocked up. So it doesn't naturally compound, but you can compound it if you want. And so all of those things have worked to show that the economic model is actually pretty good because we model it off of gold. Gold still has an inflation rate, even though people see it as digital gold. Bitcoin's digital gold. It's kind of not because there's still gold being discovered. It's still being mined all over the world. And it's about 0.5% to 3% is about the emission of gold every year, which is shown to still maintain a pretty stable value, even with that much being mined. But the other part of it that's really cool is transaction fees that you pay into Nexus. Instead of going to the miners, it gets burnt. It basically gets taken out of circulation. So the transaction fees remove supply. And then there's the DAO, if you're familiar with the decentralized autonomous organization architecture and the voting. That's one thing with the trust keys that's really important because now you can't just buy your way into the system and then vote and control the voting. You have to dedicate time to the system. And generally, people that are more wealthy, time is worth more to them. So, why am I going to spend 2 years to sit here and stake this wallet just to try to mess with these, people? But then all the people that have been staking still have more time than you'll ever get, right? So it's harder to fix the voting system in your favor. But that's one aspect of the voting system, which when it's fully complete, that's going to be fully automated, which means people will be able to vote on all of the transaction fees. So there might be a yearly proposal for, hey, I want to modify the fee for, how much it costs to create a new asset or, the cost of a transaction or whatever else. So that in the future, when there's a good economic time, they can say, okay, well, we're gonna since the economy is good right now, we're gonna increase the fees, and we're gonna make the fees get more expensive to use the network because there's a lot of transaction volume, and you'll be able to balance that, saying, okay, well, there's 1 million transactions a day happening, and the average value of that is half a nexus or 0.1 nexus. Okay, that's 100,000 nexus a day. Then you compare that against your emission. Okay, there's 50,000 or 75,000 nexus minted per day. Okay, so if we do it and set it at 100,000 nexus per day, as far as fees, then we're going to deflate the currency supply. And so people will be able to, okay, well, when we're in a good economic time, we're going to bring the actual total amount down so that we can increase the value. And since we can pay those fees, or if we're in a bad economic time, we're going to lower the fees and inflate it a little bit so that everybody's got a little bit more money in their pockets. And so it kind of, I guess, creates a pseudo elastic supply, but it's not anything governed by anybody. It's just, you have your actual emission through miners and stakers, and then you combat that with the transaction fees and the usage of the network, which is really a unique design. And it ensures that there's always going to be security on the network, right? It's not reliant. If there's a low transaction volume period, people aren't going to have to jump off the network on mining to maintain their electricity costs, right? And jump to another coin. With Bitcoin, like if transaction volume or fees drop significantly when there's not enough Bitcoin reward, they're going to be hurting. They're going to either have to spend their saved Bitcoin, but once those reserves get depleted, then they're going to have to go to Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV, right, to maintain their income, because they're not going to be able to pay. Some of those Bitcoin miners pay $100,000 power bills per month. And if you got 50,000, you're out $50,000. And if you don't have reserve for that, you're done. And so eventually, after enough stress in that, you get that issue. So it makes, I guess, kind of the security of the network more volatile when you're relying on this inconsistent factor, which is transaction volume. With Nexus, it doesn't matter. What just happens when there's less transaction volume and less fees is the supply just increases slightly. And then, as more usage, then that supply can get decreased based on what everybody votes it on. So yeah, it creates this really cool, guaranteed security, guaranteed income, no matter what, it's not going to change. And again, it allows you to combat that. If you feel like, hey, 100 million Nexus is too much, then it can slowly get inched back, right? So it's a different, economic system, but like I said, it clears the way for people to be able to stake and receive rewards for that. And that allows them to vote and set the fee models so that, everybody can agree, hey, do we want to, expand it slightly or contract it? And that is, it is how the original colonies actually in the US were before the British. That a lot of the war, the Revolutionary War, was against, they said that they couldn't mint their own currency. I think Benjamin Franklin was one of the ones that invented it, where he said that they just make enough money for everybody to have money, and nobody was jobless. There was nobody that was jobless. Nobody was homeless, because there was enough money to go around. So people talk about deflation is great, which it is if you have tons of the money already and you're increasing the value of it. But like when you deflate these currencies too, there's not enough to go around. And if there's not enough to go around, then people can't get paid for jobs, or people can't go spend it at the shop, so that then they can't hire a new person. So there is a value in having a little bit of inflation, but also a little bit of deflation to combat that, because how it is now, the inflation is totally ridiculous, and it's a hidden tax. But in a sense, the transaction fees in Nexus pay everybody that holds Nexus, because it slowly decreases the supply, which adds value to the currency and the markets if they're rational in correlation to that.
Very intelligent. A couple more questions. Let's talk about the listing of the token. I noted that Nexus is very limited in its listings. It was initially on Trade Ogre, then got CoinSpot, but then got taken down. Now it's on ZegX, often with high slippage. Is there a reason why Nexus opted for these kind of more little known exchanges, often with very obscure pairs? Did you want to reduce your tether exposure, or what was the reason for that?
Not by choice. I mean, I guess you could call it a series of unfortunate events. So we've always been on Bittrex before Bittrex was big, right? Bittrex, I think 2015 is when we got listed. And I've always been good friends with Richie. Like Richie deals with shitcoin devs all the time. So, he'll be like, hey, there's a problem. And they'll be like, oh, okay. And then they'll just ignore him, right? And so many times he's like, kudos, man. Like, I did not expect you to be able to fix that, because you have to fix it without having access to their wallet.dat and shooting in the dark. So many times. So me and Richie were really cool. So we always had a really solid relationship with Bittrex. He could tell that I really cared about developing and I'd solve the problems, and I understood the code well enough to solve the problems, which was kind of a rare trait. And then the community really wanted to add us to Binance. I think we won a competition for the voting thing in 2018. And then they wanted like this $100,000 to get listed in this ridiculous value. And we're kind of like, I don't know about that. And then people are like, no, we should do it anyway, So I talked to them. They were cool though at the time. Like Ashley was the person that I worked with, and like I think a month later decided that we were gonna do it, but the BNB price had like multiplied by 10. And we're like, hey, can you just honor the original price since we won? And they're like, yeah, that's cool. It was cool. They're pretty fair, like technically speaking, they were very, very difficult to work with. It asked me how to send Bitcoin transactions, which is okay. I mean, but so we had maintained a pretty decent relationship with Binance, but there's this thing called the Binance curse. If you look on Urban Dictionary, it actually is a thing where the story goes that coins that get added to Binance just basically get dumped in oblivion because Binance pump and dump. So sure enough, Binance, they're like, okay, we'll accept your listing. I think this was like April of 2018, something like that. And they said, but we're not going to tell you when we list you. And so naturally, they list us at some random time in the future. I think it was close to June. And the price pumped to like $3 and then boom, instantly dumped, right? As soon as we get added on Binance. And I was like, there it goes, and then since then it's just been constant downward selling pressure, which has been from a lot of other factors. And then over time, there was some, I don't know, Binance started changing. Like the original team that I used to work with, we were a gold label project. Like we were really good friends, like Wayne Fu. He was great. I still talk to the guy. He's a good guy. He really liked us too. He said, like, well, you guys mean business. You guys, okay, cool, respect. But as Binance started getting in hot water, and then I think there was the FTX thing that was a big issue, and the Luna crash, and kind of some of that deceptive stuff. And then there was also like FUD team from like some of remember Keith, and like there was some little infighting in that, and then he just went on this mission to be like, I'm going to destroy Nexus and get them delisted from Binance. So they were like sending Binance like, we're security and all this crazy. So they're giving us all this legal paperwork from Binance. And like it was just, so it was a lot of factors. And then our volume was kind of going down. It wasn't like millions of dollars per day anymore. And then, just out of nowhere, they're just like, okay, delisted. And then we were on Bittrex, and then Bittrex, I think a few months later shuts out US customers. And then they eventually, shut down the whole global operations because the Biden administration just was going after all of these guys hardcore. So, and all we really were on was, I think, CoinStore at the time. I think we got on Trade Ogre when Bittrex US customers went down. But the way that the market is, right? It's most of these projects, the IEOs, ICOs, or whatever they want to call it nowadays, ITO, they just raise ridiculous amounts of money. And so all these exchanges are built up around that ridiculousness. So like, I mean, I remember even what was the wallet? Electrum wallet? Was it Electrum? They wanted like $1 million to just add us to their token wallet, just like a wallet. It's just like, whoa, man. Like so there's this ridiculous extortion, in all the exchanges. So, we're working Bybit, we're getting the volume up. So if anybody, wants to help, I think we need to get up to like 50 to 100,000 volume a day, and they just naturally add you. Bybit's pretty cool. So we're working on that. I mean, Kraken's coming under a lot of scrutiny. We have applied to them a few times. So, I mean, we would like to get on some of these larger exchanges, but it's just the nature of the delisting from Binance that really hurt a lot of our credibility. A lot of people got really mad at us. They didn't understand though the whole inner workings of what was happening behind the scenes. It's kind of ironic. We actually never reached the all-time high that we hit on Bittrex in 2018. Early, I think January 2018, we hit $15, I believe, on Bittrex. And the highest we ever got on Binance was $2. So that should say a lot. And there was a lot of market manipulating. And if you saw the court paperwork with CZ, he actually got caught with 40 billion in customer funds in his own personal bank accounts. Yep. So a lot of the money that you were putting in Binance was being used to pump and dump all these different markets and stuff. So, I mean, the fact that we're still here is a huge testament. Usually a coin that gets delisted for Binance, it's a death wish. And we're still going strong. I mean, some of the communities, smaller than it was, but people usually always come back. I see people from 5-6 years ago that still keep coming back no matter what, because they see that what we're doing here is we're trying to do this in the real way. I'm trying to really, I guess, realize these original visions of crypto. And so, we'll get on more exchanges as our volume goes up and more popularity, more exchanges pick you up. And I've actually had like 2 new exchange listing offerings right now that are reasonable prices, and 1 fiat on an off ramp that has an API. So I'm negotiating with them right now. So we should be able to integrate that in to our mobile wallet. And that's going to be really cool.
Well, that was my next question.
A huge. Yeah.
That's actually
I've been working on that. I was wanting to do that 2021. I met these guys that, because I don't know if you know Wilder.earth, one of our use cases. They built a whole trading carbon credits trading platform. They like this one guy, Mike. It's cool. He built this whole platform that competes with like these Singapore guys that like spent millions of dollars to this, and he did it single-handed with no code tools in Nexus. Like, and he's like, Nexus is my secret weapon, man. And like they said, oh, that's rubbish that you would be able to do that. We spent millions of dollars and we haven't even achieved it. And he's like, I did, and he had it. It works. It's great. But one of the things he needed was a fiat on and off ramp for his, he's doing sometimes $100 million deals. I think they're preserving millions of hectares right now, just incentivizing environmental biodiversity, which is really cool.
So
Which is making a really meaningful impact, which I appreciate. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, I'm going off in the weeds. But yeah, long story short, I was going to create a fiat ramp, but now we got it.
sure. The mobile wallet is definitely a good addition. In the past, it was very difficult with the desktop. It was very technical. It was very, um, a lot of people obviously say, the synchronization times are often too long. It does feel a little bit NASA-ish. Is there any plans to make it a little bit more user-friendly, less synchronization time, that kind of stuff? I think you're lagging, perhaps. Can you hear me? Okay, you're good now. I can see you move.
There you are. Yeah,
Yeah,
it looks like one of my phones hooked up, but I got another one here.
yeah, that's all
See,
right.
oh, it died. Okay, cool.
For the
Well, I got
viewers, his internet is I think 1 or 2 bars, so just excuse the lag, but that's okay. So basically, just rephrasing the question, uh, a lot of users say that the synchronization times are a bit long on the wallet. It often has
yeah.
that NASA kind of very technical feel. Is there any future updates to make it a little bit more user-friendly, perhaps reduce the
Yeah.
synchronization time? And
Yeah,
tell us
I think
about
I'll
the wallet. Yeah.
I think I'll be able to cut it in half, if not more, right now. A lot of that's just the data throughput. It's pretty low, and this is just the unfortunate part of decentralized maximalism. Most mobile wallets use a proxy, right? So think of it as that you have the blockchain, and then you have a server that interprets the blockchain data, and then you're connecting to that server. And so you sign it offline like a typical Bitcoin wallet. So it's non-custodial, but still, if that proxy goes down, it goes down. So we actually, as far as I'm aware, the first ones that have been able to actually compile a node onto your phone, and it's running a full-fledged node. It has a full security of it. It's trustless too. So that means like you don't have to believe anything. You're verifying it all cryptographically with the Merkle proofs and the block headers. But you do need the block headers. So right now it has block headers and some extra metadata like chain state data that I'm just sending through. But technically that is like relying on the trust of that data to be correct as well, right? Because it should be calculated into the chain. So that's a next step that I'm actually working on right now is cutting that. I think I'll be able to cut it by a factor of 2. And then the new lower level database engine that I've been developing since about I've been working on the lower level database since about 21 I got is totally constant time. It doesn't slow down as more data gets added to it. So that should add a lot more as well, because it will start slowing down the sync time just a little bit because of all the extra data that it has to add into the database. So between the two of those, I think we can cut it down significantly. And I mean, I've been considering too packaging it with the wallet install. So you download it all, because that is faster than synchronizing if we could package it in with the mobile wallet, or even hard coding it. I don't know how bad that would get in the binary, but I could hard code the block headers, which I've considered that, right, as another way to overcome that limitation. But that is just the nature of, if you want it to be trustless, you have to have the data to compare all of the data you're getting. Like I download my SIG chain, I need to verify that transaction actually happened on the chain. But it's really cool that we've been able to do it. We actually have full smart contract processing. Like it's not emulating any of it. It's processing all of the conditional contracts completely on chain without needing the entire global chain state, which I think Ethereum has that on like their 2030 list or 2040 probably for them, like to actually be able to have a smart contract processing on a node that's a light client. So, it's going to be a little bit extra work, like it has been, even to get it to compile onto a phone and run with React Native. But yeah, long story short, I think I should be able to cut it in half, if not even more, ideally to have a bootstrap where the latest release has all of those block headers and hashes in them, or maybe even just the Merkle roots and the block hashes, because that I might even be able to just do Merkle roots and block hash. That
Is
might
that
save a
like
lot. And then
is
just
that like
compile.
mm, is that like a Tridium? Is that similar to your Tridium update or different? Tridium.
The next update plus plus.
I think
Tritium was a whole new architecture.
sure. Maybe just like one
Yeah, it
sentence
was
on Tridium.
like the
Yeah.
2019 Tritium. Yeah. Tritium was the unleashing of a completely new blockchain architecture. So we actually had to like upgrade the entire blockchain block data and all that header data, which made it possible to run the light client. And then Tritium plus plus ended up being a huge overhaul, which is still ongoing, but I think if you look at like the code changes over the last like few years, it's pretty much the whole code base has been like almost rebuilt or added to. Like the entire API had to totally just revamp, but it's improved in speed and security substantially. So yeah, it's the Tritium plus plus one was the most recent release, and then I'm working on additional features on top of that, like the relay. Basically, it's acts like an RTR, which is a list terminology for like peer-to-peer messaging, quantum-resistant peer-to-peer messaging, which just allows you to securely transmit data through peer-to-peer without having to rely on any central authority. And then a remote login system is another big feature that's been requested, where you can use your phone and mobile wallet as kind of an authenticator app. So when you go on a website, it's a DApp per se, and you want to say, okay, I want to log in, and they want to use Nexus, then you can say, just like log in with Google, you link your SIG chain to that web app. And then what happens is your phone is the one that's actually creating the transactions. So it helps with scaling, and it also acts as a decentralized authentication system. And it also can act as a password manager, because you can create all these different profiles that are managed under your master credentials.
Yep.
And that's a huge feature I see actually is happening, especially as more people want to just, hey, we don't want to develop an authentication system. We can choose Nexuses, which
Mhm.
log in with Nexus, next to log in with Google and log in with Facebook, but is a decentralized identity where nobody manages your data or controls it or tracks you or anything like that. So,
Sure. We've
yeah,
reached the final two questions. Have you
perfect.
heard of David Shom, the father of cryptography? He's the
Yeah,
founder of XX Network, and also there's other teams like QRL who are doing in the quantum space. What are your
yeah.
thoughts on these systems? Briefly, how do they differ? And do you have any partnerships with quantum uh, technologies or companies like D-Wave, Cold Quanta, Alice and Bob, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, the D Wave is like an optimization algorithm, so it's not actually running Shores. So that's kind of different. Quantum computers think of them as like ASICs, if you know what that means, application specific integrated circuit. There is no universal quantum processor yet, which is what your processor is running silicon right now. It's universal, which means that you can compile it to do pretty much anything in computing. Otherwise, you have to make the computer program qubit by qubit by qubit. And so that's what Shor's algorithm is. Think of the algorithm as like the program, but you have to program it with hardware, if that makes sense. That's what the new Bitcoin miners are. It's literally the SHA-256 algorithm, but as a transistor program, so that there's no actual software on it. It's just transistor for transistor, every single logic gate. So David Chum, I really respect the guy. I really appreciate him. I actually really liked him calling out Adam Back, because Adam Back cites himself as the only person that Satoshi ever cited in the white paper. I don't know if you saw that. He's like, well, are you familiar that there was a similar algorithm about Hashcash that was developed, 2 years before you published Hashcash, and it was already very well known. And he's like, oh well, you know, yeah, I didn't know about it and whatever. It's just like, oh, plagiarism. David Chum's dope, and he was really respectful in that. I really like the guy. Quantum resistant ledger, I like what they're doing. I mean, they touted out is they're the first quantum resistant blockchain ever, and like we kind of got into a little bit of a poo-poo with each other on Twitter. So I mean, we kind of, I don't know. I guess I could be a little outspoken, because they were an ICO Ethereum ERC20 token at first, and then they were going around saying the first quantum resistant blockchain ever. And I'm like, you're not. You're an ERC20 token, man. Plus, we've been doing this since way before you, but it's cool, whatever. But they're using it's called XMSS, Extended Merkle Signature Scheme. It's a hash based, so I generally stay away from hash-based signatures, because um, they're big and bulky. I mean, they're a little bit faster, but they're huge signatures. And they wrote it in Python, which I'm a critic. Python's like 200 times slower than C++. If you're talking about creating a scaling system, don't write it in Python. That's just me. You pay for it with C++. It's unforgiving. It's a very unforgiving language. Python's very forgiving, but I like that people are starting to consider doing that, and I think it's good that they're doing that in that sense. But they're going to have huge scaling issues, massive scaling issues. So it may work now. I mean, I'm usually open to collaborating, but crypto's kind of it's an interesting industry. It's hard to find the right people that are, I guess, aligned with the right ethos, as you can see. I mean, like Solana, for instance, I'm a bit of a critic of because they just turn it off. Like, oh, sorry, we just reset the network again. Oh, we just turned Solana off. It's like if you can turn it off, it's not decentralized. And
Exactly.
they're mimicking. Yeah, they're mimicking all of these technology. And it's really easy. Like, dude, I could build you a million transaction per second system with a centralized server cluster. Easy. That's stupid simple to do. It's just protocol messages and a little bit of authentication and spread that out over multiple computers and done, right? Manage it on your own central database cluster. It's simple, but the decentralization it's an art to do it. And I love it because you have to think of all these things. You have to make it an open system that anyone can access, but then anyone can mess with. And you have to disincentivize those attacks and also protect against them in all these varying different ways to allow it to be scaling in its open, decentralized way. And I think a lot of the industry has just kind of given up on that. They're just like, okay, well, we're never going to really be able to scale in a decentralized way. It competes with Visa. So we have to just make it centralized. And that's kind of Solana. And, they're pushing all their Solana meme coins and all the celebrities. Did you see the 50 Cent one where 50 Cent did the rug pull? And
I
it's just
did.
like,
I
come on,
did.
guys. Like, yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm a purist in that sense, I guess, going back. So, anybody that's aligned on those same ethos, like I appreciate. And I think,
definitely.
anonymity, decentralization, and openness are really important for crypto to really realize the vision.
Yeah. So, final thoughts is I have a law. I call it Rick's law. It's a modification of Warren Buffett's quote, "Money will flow from the impatient to the patient." My version
Yeah.
is money will flow from non-quantum systems into quantum systems.
Yeah.
With that, what is Nexus's roadmap? I see there's plans for tokenization of securities, delegated proof of stake, which you already explained. But what's next on what's the last thing to achieve for Nexus before it becomes that mainstream thing, where it's the nexus of everything?
Good question. I think part of it is our technological advantage, but also the other part of it is the world's awareness for the need of it right now. Look at meme coins and get rich quick. And, a lot of crypto is just driven on this speculative, I need money, I want money, I'm going to get money. There's some that like, Odysee is trying to do decentralized video hosting, but they're really, if you look at their code, I looked at it, they're using content delivery networks in their own servers to cache all the videos, but then they store it on IPFS. So I mean, even the file system hasn't really been fully realized. So the things that I really think are important is decentralized file management and hosting and incentivization, which means, I can monetize my disk space in a decentralized open way and access any of those files and search those files. That's huge, which I have search built in. I built a query language, kind of like SQL in the API, actually. So Nexus natively, you don't have to like dump all your data into a SQL database to search it. Like you can just run a query and it's really powerful. It's got operators too. So you actually have Excel functionality in it. I'm really proud of it. Sorry if I'm talking too much
No,
about it, but it's
um,
really cool. You can do like, yeah, you can like filter a set of transactions between certain sets of dates, and then you can do, slash balance slash sum, and you can get a sum of all of your credits within these date ranges. And instead of having to know the Unix timestamp, you can use like the sense function operator or whatever else. So it's really powerful. It kind of combines Excel-like functionality in this JSON API and whatever. So naturally, if you have a file that you upload and that file is distributed and split up between different peers, and you're paying them Nexus per month to host, and they're developing a reputation, and that file has a register, which is the metadata for the file, which every file has metadata, you can search that metadata on those registers. So I can search for any specific file. So I can label tags on my file and boom, I can search your file, which then sets a foundation for decentralized search algorithms, which I already did a demonstration at a conference a few years ago. just with, metadata on IPFS files for, my friend Ernest Hancock. And he's like, IPFS doesn't have search and it's not decentralized. People use centralized databases to, employ search functionality. But the problem with that is if it goes down, it's gone. And you can't get it back up unless you fire up another server. And also the principle of it too, right? Like, hey, we're building decentralized stuff, right? You're making a decentralized video platform. Make sure it's decentralized in every aspect, not cutting centralized corners.
Mhm.
Maybe that's my tech snobbiness. But search is pretty much there already. But we need the file management and the remote login, and then the peer-to-peer relay system. That's really important too, because now you can securely transmit data between applications. You can basically do peer-to-peer chat. That's another really big one that's, I think, important. Peer-to-peer messaging. And there's another one, somebody in the community is working on decentralized social media standard. He's almost done with it. He's just waiting on, a couple features from me that I'm developing. So that's use cases are driving a lot of those priorities. That's on the single dimensional blockchain aspect. But then we get to the multidimensional chaining and all of that comes out, and, the Amine and then Obsidian. So, when I consider it done, ready for mainstream, it would be Obsidian. That creates like the decentralized mining pool, the multi-layer consensus, the multi-layer chaining too. Instead of just chaining in one direction, you're chaining in multiple dimensions, which allows you to create this three-dimensional block, basically that you could think of that as like, it's like all of the transactions are held on different nodes. It's like this large sharding system, but they all correlate back to this root cube. And you always have a Merkle path back to this root cube, so that this big giant block that could be 100 gigabytes, which you'll have if you have really, really large transaction volumes, it's storing that data more than processing it. That's the biggest problem, right? Like I was saying, a transaction, if it's a kilobyte and you're doing 1 million transactions a second, okay, now you've got what that would be a gigabyte per second. Now you got 86,400 seconds in a day. Now you've got 86 petabytes per day, just at 1 million transactions a second, right? It's just, sure, you can process that, but where are you going to put it? It's a big issue. So, the multidimensional chaining also creates data sharding with the lower level database architecture. That's, I think, what's really going to be important for mainstream adoption. We need to have the full multidimensional sharding systems. Ethereum gave up on sharding already because it's too hard. I get it. I understand. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've been seeing it, and I was like, your sharding's not going to work, guys. Plasma. They're like, no, it's going to drop Plasma, and then they're, chain of chains, and they drop that. And I spare you the details on why they'd run into these issues, but the architecture I've been developing, it'll work. And I've actually seen other people try to steal. I think Zilla Q stole some of it when they had like, a mining layer measuring and comparing against like a consensus layer, because you need to have multiple layers in a consensus, right, in order for it to be fully scalable. You can't just have this flat system. But then also the architecture of the transactions and dependence, right? If there's a dependent on another contract, you need to package that, but you can't package that if you have all these previous states that you need to have. But what's so cool about a SIG chain transaction is everything in that one transaction is everything you need. You have the state of the register that was modified. You have the operations. All you need is that one transaction and a Merkle proof to it to know that's the state you need. So if you need any extra states, you just package your extra states with that one that's operating on those states or reusing them as prerequisites, and boom, you don't have that sharding issue where one shard slows down another shard. And then the multidimensional chaining, that preserves it, makes it a lot harder to manipulate, because you're chaining across as well as you're chaining forward. So if you imagine like these fingers as your shards, you're chaining across each of these shards too, so that they become one object in a sense, kind of like a wafer you could see it as. And then that object is then added in with the L2 layer, and then the L3 layer acts kind of a mining pool where everybody submits shares. And so that all of that mining power is used instead of just the one that wins. Because in Bitcoin, the only computing power that actually goes towards network security is the miner that finds that hash, finds that winning hash. All the other miners, all that electricity they spend, it's gone. It's just, you got to reset and start mining the next hash. So if we could capture all of that electricity, right, capture all of that mining power and focus that in, you're going to get a lot more secure mining system, right? So that's the L3 layer. So that's when I say it'll be fully ready for mass adoption. I don't know when that'll be done. It's never been done, but we're going to stage it in. So, Tritium's the single dimensional chain. When we get to a mean, then you'll be able to, opt into a shard and be like, okay, I want to process my microtransactions on these shards, and you'll have 4 shards to start. so that you can, move your coins into there and process on the shard systems. And then the shards and their hashes will be processed like a transaction in a group on the Tritium block, but you still be able to process transactions through Tritium as well. So it's going to, transition people slowly that way. And then eventually Obsidian wraps that all up and puts a shiny little mining bow on it. So yeah, that's the full vision. And then, by that time as well, like having more satellite communication working, mesh network communication. That's another really important one where we can form local mesh networks and local nexuses, for, many other reasons than just one. Imagine if power grids fail or food grids fail or whatever. We'll need to be able to communicate with one another. There's so many places that are rural that don't have very good communication with one another. I've known people from really rural Australia that just, it's very hard for them to get connected to the world, right? And so, seeing the world more interconnected and information travel freely and not being able to be corrupted, the search not being able to control, the information being more free and open, communication and currency and all of that tied together. And that's the ideal of a Nexus, which I work every day to achieve. And it's a big vision and it's a lofty goal, but I still got probably 50 more years left in me. So I'll keep going.
Definitely. And look, you've done a wonderful job. I'm big fan of Nexus. I think Nexus will be a quantum monster, is what I tweeted. I definitely see your vision. And I do think that Nexus will be at the forefront of things in the future. I think if David Shom was the grandfather of cryptography, I think you would probably be his grandson. So
thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot for all your work. Thanks for the interview today. And ladies and gentlemen, we thank Mr. Colin Cantrell, founder of Nexus blockchain.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
You too, brother.